Thank you all. And Elizabeth and Thomas, thank you. Dr. Curtis, thank you. And thanks to the alumni for honoring me. It is indeed an honor. It's thrilling to be here. After so many years away, I have come back to reunions to see Elizabeth play soccer and score the winning goal for an undefeated season. And attend 2 classes today with Elizabeth and Thomas, which were very gratifying, a little above my head, but still very interesting. Since I was told about this award, well, first let me say something. Looking at you all and hearing the applause, I'm reminded of another speech I gave when we were trying to get the SALT II treaty ratified. And we fanned out over the country to try to convince people, to convince their senators to ratify it. And I remember going to an unnamed state, a state which will remain unnamed. It had a name, I don't know how to tell you. Very Republican, and this was Jimmy Carter's treaty. And I was seated at lunch next to the governor who was going to introduce me, who was a member of the other party. And I said to him, does this audience really understand the issues? Have they read about it? Do they know what I'm going to be talking about? He said, absolutely. No, very well. I said, are any of them for my treaty? He said, some, and a long pause, if any. That was not an auspicious start, whereas your greeting here is an auspicious start. Since I learned of this award, I've given a great deal of thought to my years at Deerfield. I do frequently, but and things I could talk about, talk to you about. And one thing jumped at me for one aspect, and that's change. Now, I was here a long time ago, 63 years ago, but much has changed in so many respects. When I was here, we had a war, and we were fighting against Germany and Japan and Italy. Today, Germany and Italy are NATO allies. Japan is our strongest supporter in the Pacific. Russia and China, which were our allies then, are now certainly competitors, if not enemies. Culturally, there have been huge changes, and I particularly think about what has happened to women in those years. When I was here, there was a boys' school with a male head. I went to Harvard College, which was a men's college, with a male dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. And I went to Harvard Law School, which had a male dean and only graduated girls the first year I was there for the first time. Now, I thought of this. My school has a woman running it. My college has a woman running it. My law school has a woman running it. My university has a woman running it. And the university endowment is also run by a woman who happens to be my daughter. Boys, get on it. We're falling behind. Other changes, obviously, in sports and entertainment, all I can think of is that the New York Giants are in San Francisco. The Brooklyn Dodgers, Los Angeles. My team, the Philadelphia Athletics, is in Oakland via Kansas City. And the Boston Braves, with a few stops on the way, are in Atlanta. Did I think any of those things were going to happen when I was here? Of course not. And of course, the ultimate change is in the technology. Texting. We didn't have television. It's hard to believe for you all, I'm sure. We did have radio, but not very good. And all the other things, cell phones, iPods, and so forth. I'm just reminded, and leave you with this thought. In the late 19th century, the head of the United States Patent Office wrote a letter to the President recommending that his office be abolished. The reason? Because and I quote, because everything that can be invented has been invented. But one thing, and I'm being a little serious, one thing to my regret that has not changed, and that is the threat of nuclear weapons. I've spent a lot of time worrying about this and dealing with it. And the fact of the matter is that it hasn't gotten any better. In fact, as I will explain, I think it's gotten worse. At the end of the war, the United States had a monopoly. We dropped 2 bombs on Japan. By the way, I just reread John Hersey's book, Hiroshima, and I recommend it to all of you if any of you think that a nuclear weapon has any benefits at all. It's a terrifying book about what happens to people who suffer from a nuclear blast. But then quickly we were caught, so to speak, by the Soviet Union, by France, China, and the United Kingdom. So there were 5 nuclear states. But we got into this Cold War in which the United States and the Soviet Union attempted to outdo each other with the manufacture of nuclear weapons and their delivery systems. But with the exception, as I mentioned in one of the classes this morning, I was never really worried that there would be a nuclear war because we were under the umbrella, if you will, of mutual assured destruction, that one side attacked the other. The attackee would be sure to re-attack or counterattack the attacker, and both countries would be destroyed. I remember President Eisenhower, when asked about the threat of nuclear war and the threat of the Soviets attacking us, he said, the men who were in the Kremlin spent their entire career getting there, and they did not do that in order to be incinerated. And so, with the exception of Stalin's ambitions, I really was not too concerned that we might have a nuclear war. But then, and the irony here is, the Cold War ended. Not that Russia and we are pals, but we certainly are not in the same confrontational relationship that we were then. And in my view, the danger of nuclear war today is far greater than it was at the height of the Cold War. That's a depressing thought, but maybe you'll remember it when you leave here. Yes, there are still the 5 nuclear weapon states that I mentioned, but there are several more. India and Pakistan have both tested and are deploying nuclear weapons. Israel clearly has one. It's never tested it. It uses the wonderful expression, we will not be the first to introduce nuclear weapons into the Middle East. The question, what does introduce mean? And then, of course, we have the problem of Iran and North Korea. So there are many more nuclear weapons. And what I'm concerned about is, one, that they're not so well guarded by some of, particularly in India and Pakistan, but also the possibility of an honest-to-God nuclear war starting in that area. Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, once said that it's the perfect place for a nuclear war to start. 2 countries adjacent to each other, do not like each other. One is strongly more powerful conventionally than the other, and neither one of them has any clue how to use them. And someday, a tinderbox like Kashmir may set off that war. But more, to me,